Reopening the country, the White House continues its fight against the coronavirus crisis. An update on its efforts to find a vaccine. Outreach attempt, new developments in U.S. plans to end North Korea's nuclear weapons program. And friendship and freedom. A Chinese journalist now living in Italy tells us about his journey to the Catholic faith. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Owen Jensen. Tracy is off tonight. President Donald Trump is pushing for schools to reopen this fall. We have one-on-one interviews tonight with members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force and Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. We begin with Dr. Deborah Birx, who tells us with social distancing and masks, schools can reopen safely.
I think we're very much interested in how we reopen schools both safely, but really looking at it from the perspective of child-centered. What is best for our children of America, and using that as our absolute center focus, and then doing what needs to be done to meet the needs of the children of America. We think that means opening schools safely.
We also asked Dr. Birx and Health Secretary Alex Azar about a Catholic concern that a potential coronavirus vaccine could be developed using stem cells from aborted babies. They tell us that's not the case.
President Trump is the most pro-life president in the history of the United States, and I'm proud as his health secretary to support him in that vital mission. And we're not going to do anything in drug development or vaccine development that compromises those principles.
Secretary Azar tells us President Trump is looking out for anything that does not respect the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany also talks to us about reopening schools and President Donald Trump's fight for the unborn. Joining us now from the White House is Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, thank you very much for joining us right now. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Owen.
Now, let's get right to it. We know schools across the country are trying to figure out a plan to open up this fall. We also are hearing a lot about surging coronavirus cases. At the same time, though, the president today tweeted, and I want to pull it up here and read it. The president tweeted, COVID-19 China virus death rate plunges from peak in U.S., a tenfold decrease in mortality. We have the lowest mortality rate in the world. The fake news should be reporting these most important facts, but they don't. What is the president's message to school administrators, officials, parents who might be on the fence about going back to school this fall?
So the president wants to see schools reopen. He's made that very clear. He's in agreement with the American Academy of Pediatrics, who have said that they too would like to see children get back to school. He's looking at the holistic health of the child, which is also emotional well-being and intellectual well-being, and it means getting back to school. We want to do so safely. We want to use best practices, but it's imperative that we get back to school. But I just want to highlight one of the parts of those tweets that you mentioned, which is the mortality rate. We've seen a tenfold decrease. Sunday was the lowest Sunday that we've had in mortality since back in March, and we're encouraged to see that for 10 weeks the mortality rate has declined. So that is good news, though we always grieve anytime one life is lost. And
I can tell you right now, a parent myself of kids who are in high school and middle school, we're still sort of in the lurch because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And also, when you tie this to the fact that when you stay closed down as a country, I was just reviewing some overdose statistics that we've seen an 18% increase in doses back in March, going up to 42% last month. So when you are closed down and people do stay home, you do see these kinds of things happen, these negative repercussions.
On the subject of children, it's such a sad story. This past weekend was so terribly violent. Kids all across the country losing their lives to gunfire. Can anything be done right now at this point in time to stop this senseless violence?
Yeah, oh, and thank you very much for bringing that up, because it's very important. When you've looked across the country and over the weekend, dozens killed, 5 children, as you noted, in America's streets. This president's appalled by that. He's disturbed by it. And there is things that can be done. First, when you talk about defunding the police, I would note that you had Mayor de Blasio pulling $1.5 billion from the New York City Police Department. And then you've seen an increase over the weekends in the number of shootings, because people are aware that, law enforcement is in part winding down with this decrease in funding, some law enforcement pulling back, and with that you see an increase in crime, and we saw it in LA County as well. The president has said, hey, I have federal resources here if you need the assistance of the federal government, but it's incumbent upon states to request those resources, because that's the way the Constitution works in federalism.
Unemployment, I want to switch gears here for a second. Unemployment numbers in June were huge, great. Millions of people got their jobs back, but millions of Americans still out of work. What's the president's message to them?
Yeah, the president has said, I'm the jobs president. He was encouraged to see that, they anticipated 3 million jobs roughly. There were 4.8 million, largest jobs report in one month in history, followed by a record set the previous month, and the stock market increasing because people have faith in this president. He's the jobs president. He brought us the hottest economy in modern history once, and he'll do it again. More work to be done, but we have the right person at the helm to do that job.
We also know President Trump is adamantly pro-life. If he's reelected, what is his plan going forward to save the lives of unborn babies?
Yeah, so one thing that he's emphasized recently is it's become increasingly clear that we need even more conservative judges. He just surpassed 200 on the Supreme Court. He appointed 2, but we've seen decisions go the other way on DACA, for instance. It's one example, and Title IX as well. So the president has emphasized, look, we need religious freedom. We need pro-life judges. He's vowed to put forward a new list of conservative justices, and we believe that through the courts, pro-life issues can advance, and he's done a great job so far, and he has more to do in his second term. We've
got to keep that pro-life fight going. Thank you very much. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, thank you again very much for your time.
Thank you, Owen.
President Trump says he will veto a defense spending bill if lawmakers don't strip language requiring bases named after Confederate leaders be renamed. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has more on this story. Eric?
Well, that's correct, Owen, and that's not all. An amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act also requires name changes to all federal buildings and streets on those military bases that, quote, supported and celebrated traitors who took up arms against their country during the Civil War. One thing's for sure, that this has certainly put the pressure on not just lawmakers, but also President Trump to make a decision.
We should talk about these military bases that were named for generals that took up arms against the United States. So I welcome that discussion. I think we all should.
Combat veteran Senator Joni Ernst echoed the words of Senator Elizabeth Warren.
It's time for our military to stop paying homage to individuals who betrayed the United States and who took up arms against it to defend slavery.
Senator Warren authored an amendment forcing bases to be renamed within 3 years. President Donald Trump says he will veto the annual spending bill over the amendment. Democrats say the president is bluffing.
Let me predict. President Trump will not veto a bill that contains pay raises for our troops and crucial support for our military. This is nothing but typical bluster.
It remains to be seen where lawmakers will draw the line. Veteran Senator Tammy Duckworth asked if she agrees with calls for the removal of statues of President George Washington. Did not object.
I think we should listen to everybody. I think we should listen to the argument there.
President Trump says the integrity of our country is under threat.
By tearing down Washington and Jefferson, these radicals would tear down the very heritage for which men gave their lives to win the Civil War.
So how is this all going to play out? Well, both the House and the Senate are going to come up with their own separate bills. They're going to be put together into one giant bill that's going to head to the president's desk. The deadline for the president to sign that is December 31st. Owen?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill. Thank you very much, Eric. President Donald Trump's special representative for North Korea is in South Korea, but the communist North is rejecting a resumption of nuclear talks. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun will be meeting with South Korean and Japanese officials on a host of issues, including nuclear talks. North Korea wants major sanctions relief in exchange for a partial surrender of its nuclear capability. Facebook, Twitter, and Google are no longer honoring requests by Hong Kong for user data because of the hugely criticized new security law. And now TikTok is also pulling out of Hong Kong. One thing the law does criminalizes some pro-democracy slogans because they could be subversive.
Given the escalating national security risks that we have seen since June last year, and the inability of the Hong Kong SAR, not just the government, but also the Legislative Council, to enact local legislation, the central government has to take resolute actions.
Carrie Lam, the city's Beijing-backed chief exec, who is also Catholic, says the new law is constitutional and insists it will not undermine human rights. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong legislature descended into a shouting match over the new national security law. Pro-democracy legislators held up blank sheets of paper and asked if that was a violation of the new law. Also, police can order social media platforms and internet service providers to remove messages that could endanger national security. Dozens have been killed in southern Japan from flooding and heavy rain pounding the area since Friday, and 3 million people are being advised to evacuate. Tens of thousands of soldiers, meantime, are trying to reach hardest-hit towns but are getting bogged down by mudslides and continuing rain. Soldiers use boats to rescue some. More rain is expected. As Israel moves forward with asserting control over parts of the West Bank, Israelis say minorities have equal rights, but Palestinians say they face discrimination.
You're talking about ideological settler. He thinks that must be here Jewish majority. He's not the settler that comes to be your neighbor. He comes to take the next house and the next house.
Let's not forget, though, that this is a Jewish state for the Jewish people. Yes, there are minorities here, and they are given all the social rights and all the rights that they should.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised to annex Israeli settlements in the occupied territories in line with President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. More changes announced for the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia later this month. The pebbles that are traditionally thrown at the cube-shaped Kaaba will be sterilized and bagged ahead of time. Also, it'll be mandatory to wear masks, maintain physical distance during prayers, and sleep in tents following social distancing guidelines. The president of Brazil tests positive for COVID-19 after months of downplaying the severity of the disease. Jair Bolsonaro confirmed the test results earlier today while speaking to reporters. He's been criticized for saying COVID-19 is nothing more than a little flu. Over the weekend, he attended a 4th of July party at the U.S. ambassador's house. The embassy says the ambassador is not showing any symptoms but will be tested. And good news for the faithful in Brazil. Over the weekend, they were able to attend Mass for the first time in nearly 100 days. Officials are taking several safety precautions, including in the distribution of Holy Communion and in making sure the churches are not too crowded. For the past 3 months, Masses in the Catholic country primarily have been available online. Coming up, why a historic Catholic school in Baltimore has closed its doors for good. COVID-19 is impacting education and forcing some schools to permanently close. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says more than 100 Catholic schools have announced plans to shut down. A nearly 200-year-old school in Baltimore, Maryland, has already closed. But former students are fighting to keep the memory alive. Correspondent Mark Irons reports.
The motto above the hallowed entrance to the Institute of Notre Dame in Baltimore reads, Pro Deo et Patria, meaning for God and country. Now a memory of the lessons in faith and service learned inside since before the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. This school, established in 1847, it played a role in caring for Civil War soldiers, and the Catholic faith passed on from generation to generation. And though these doors are now locked, the 173-year legacy lives on.
My cousins attended here, my godmother attended here, my sister and I both attended here.
Drina Fratetta is a 1983 graduate from this all-girls Catholic high school. She's leading the charge to keep it alive.
Listening to what reasons were given for the closure of the school, none of them, in my opinion, were something that we could not overcome.
Once used as part of the Underground Railroad, this school was founded and run by the School Sisters of Notre Dame. This year, the religious order announced enrollment had drastically dropped. The building required $5 million in repairs to continue occupancy, and in a statement to the school community, the sisters wrote, "COVID-19 has caused significant added financial hardship, both in terms of projected further decline in enrollment and annual giving. Sadly, the right decision is to close our doors at the end of June. Our decision is final." And on the final day last month, a group of students from the past and present gathered together. Mandy Michael was in the class of 2005.
It's a great group of girls. We've grown up together. They're like my other sisters.
Devin Sterry and Issa Romero were in the class of 2021, now the first class that won't be graduating here since the school's founding.
It didn't quite feel like a school, almost. It felt like a home. These 3 years were one of the best 3 years that I could ever had.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has called on Congress to provide emergency aid to non-public schools, as many Catholic schools are shutting doors permanently due to the coronavirus. And Fratetta is calling on one prominent alumna from the Institute of Notre Dame, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, to help save her old school.
We haven't heard back from her yet, so hopefully we will.
Alumni of the Institute of Notre Dame have created Saving IND, Inc., a nonprofit focused on reviving a formative piece of their past to inspire future generations.
I was hoping that if I ever had a daughter, I would be able to send her to this school as well.
In Baltimore, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Mark, thank you. As we heard earlier in the show, the 4th of July holiday weekend saw more violence across the country. Bloodshed in Chicago, with 17 people killed and 70 more wounded by gunfire. A 7-year-old girl was among those shot and killed. Police said Natalia Wallace was fatally shot while standing on the footpath at her grandmother's house during a 4th of July party. And joining me now on Skype to talk more about this terrible situation is Representative Dan Lipinski, pro-life Democrat from Illinois. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's good to be with you.
Well, you know, it just seems like this is just a record that goes around and around and around. The violence, the shootings, children, babies killed. You see this happening over and over, but why is there no end to it, Congressman, and what can be done to change the situation fast?
Well, it's tough to make fast changes. The biggest problem is the breakdown of families in these neighborhoods. I mean, it's a terrible situation now in Chicago. It's gang warfare. And we know so many turn to gangs because they don't have families. Many of them don't have fathers in their homes. We need to help support the police. We need to support institutions, families in these communities, and institutions in these communities, including the Catholic churches and the Catholic schools that do exist there. And we need to give hope to the kids who are growing up in these areas.
And as you mentioned, it's hard to do it fast, but immediately, don't you have to stop the carnage right away by doing something? I mean, would you support flooding the zone, as they say, or something similar to that, with police officers, law enforcement?
I think that we need to give more support to law enforcement to go in there and to do the best job that they can. It's not easy, and I have tremendous amount of respect for law enforcement and what they have to go through. But we need to give them all the support that they can so they can get in there and work on cutting down on this violence. It's just, you know, it is so terrible to see every night in Chicago and other places around the country, and to have it happening in my own backyard, I hate to see this, and we need to act.
Well, let's move on to something else here. I want to turn to last week's decision by the Supreme Court in the June medical case, overturning that Louisiana law, holding abortion clinics to the same standards as other surgical centers. Now, you signed on to a friend of the court brief in that case, urging the U.S. Supreme Court to uphold that Louisiana law, and we all know what happened, the 5-4 decision. What was your reaction to that decision, sir?
I was extremely disappointed, especially in Chief Justice Roberts, who just a few years back had ruled the opposite way in a very similar case. This was a law that was written by a Democrat woman, African American, who wanted to make sure that women had the highest care that they could possibly receive. This should have been upheld, and it was highly disappointing, as I said, that it was not. And look, again, tying this back to the first thing we talked about, you know, I think it's clear when we devalue life as we do with abortion, and we see so many abortion clinics in African American communities across the country, I think this sends a terrible message. And we need to pick up our game and fight harder on this issue so we can protect life in our country. It's so sad to see what's happening.
You know, you've got young people dying in the streets from gunshots. You've got the unborn. You know, a lot of problems out there, and hopefully we can figure these things out in the very near future and value life in this country, as you mentioned. Thank you very much, Congressman Dan Lipinski. Thank you for your time and your insights tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, the unlikely friendship between a Chinese journalist and an Italian lawyer. Plus, Pope Francis releases his prayer intention for the month of July. We have more now on a story we first reported a few weeks ago. The story of an Italian lawyer who helped a Chinese journalist and Catholic, Dalù, gain refugee status in Italy. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Ellen Holdren brings you the story of Dalù's journey to Italy and how friendship and faith saved his life.
Dalù arrived to the Italian region of Le Marche last September, not knowing anyone. One day, Luca Antonietti, who's an Italian lawyer, got a call from his parish priest saying there was a Chinese man at his door. Antonietti studied in Shanghai and knew some Chinese. Antonietti and Dalù soon became great friends.
I met a man alone, so very lonely, and a man that he saved a heavy secret inside him.
In 1989, Chinese military fired on pro-democracy demonstrations by students in the Beijing Tiananmen Square. The Chinese regime demanded no public speech or expression of the event, calling it a counter-revolutionary violent incident. 6 years later, Dalù, a popular Chinese journalist, was fired for broadcasting a program marking the anniversary of the massacre.
Immediately after the broadcast of the program, I was censored and asked to write a review pleading guilty, saying that I was wrong, and then within a week, I was fired. And since then, I was unemployed and I could no longer find a job because there was this record in my personal file. No one dared to admit me. I was considered a dangerous person.
Dalù says his life was spared only because he was a well-known public figure, but he became socially isolated. His life changed when Dalù encountered the Catholic Church.
By chance, on the website of the Catholic Shanghai Diocese, I saw a choir recruiting freshmen, new singers. I am a music lover, so I went to the audition and did not expect that I would be accepted by them. Now, I know that it was a call by the Holy Spirit. Later, after studying for half a year, I grew to understand Catholicism. I was baptized and became a Catholic.
Despite the difficulties facing the church in China today, Dalù highlighted the strength of the Chinese Catholics' faith and is convinced the church in China will have a bright future.
There is only one church in our minds. That is the Vatican. We have only one head, the Pope. I greatly appreciate Pope Francis. He has the courage to negotiate with China.
Still today, Chinese Catholics cannot freely access the Vatican's website or other faith-related information. However, the 56-year-old continues to fight for truth and justice.
Hong Kong is the beacon of hope for democracy in China. If this beacon falls down and goes out, China will enter a dark age.
International security is monitoring Dalù to protect him from any danger he could face from the courageous decision he made in 1995. Today, he has another chance to build a life of freedom in Italy. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
Quite a story, thank you. Finally tonight, Pope Francis says his prayer intention for the month of July is aimed at families.
La Iglesia tiene que animar y estar al lado de la familia.
The Holy Father says parents and children should try to slow down their pace of life and spend quality time with one another. Pope Francis also asks governments to support families, saying they need love, respect, and guidance. We thank you very much for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Owen Jensen. Good night, and God bless.